The text arrived at 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. There was no greeting, no question mark, just a command from my mother, Jennifer, glowing in the darkness of my apartment. It read, "Dad and I finally booked the kitchen remodel. Contractors start Monday. We will need the loft for 6 weeks. Don't worry about clearing the guest room. We will take the master suite since we need the space. Leave a key under the mat." I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my tired eyes. She wasn't asking to visit. She was informing me of a hostile takeover. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't reply. I didn't call to beg for mercy or explain that I had deadlines. Asking for permission implies that they have the authority to grant it. Instead, I set my phone face down on the coffee table and opened my laptop. The screen was still open to the tab I had been staring at for weeks. The Sentinel. It was a fortress of glass and steel in the loop, with keycard elevator access and a 24-hour doorman named Elias, who looked like he could stop a tank. The rent was $550 more a month than I was currently paying. A year ago, that number would have made me hyperventilate. Tonight, it just looked like the price of admission to my own life. I clicked Apply Now. I uploaded my bank statements. I entered my credit card information for the security deposit, the first month's rent, and the exorbitant move-in fee. I didn't flinch. This wasn't spending, it was investing. I was buying stock in my own sanity. When the confirmation email dinged, "Welcome to Unit 5B, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. It was the silent protocol. I had read about it in a business strategy book once. When a hostile entity tries to corner you, you don't engage. You don't signal your next move. You simply vanish from the board and reappear where they can't reach you." My parents, Jennifer and Brian, assumed they had leverage because they assumed I was still the same daughter who handed them a spare key 3 months ago. That was the original sin. The emergency key. I remember the day Jennifer asked for it. She had stood in my new foyer, clutching her purse, her eyes wide with performative anxiety. "Just for emergencies, Kayla," she had said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "What if you choke on a grape? What if you slip in the shower and can't reach the phone? I just need to know I can get to you." It had sounded reasonable. That is the genius of the enmeshment trap. It always disguises itself as love. It wraps control in the language of care. So, I had gone to the hardware store. I had cut a copy. I had handed over the brass key that unlocked my front door, the heavy deadbolt, and effectively my autonomy. I thought I was buying her peace of mind. I didn't realize I was handing her a master pass to my existence. Within a week, emergency had been redefined. An emergency was no longer a fire or a medical crisis. An emergency became I was in the neighborhood and needed to use a bathroom. An emergency became I found a sale on curtains and had to hang them immediately. An emergency became you weren't answering your text messages within 5 minutes, so I had to check if you were dead. I looked at the confirmation screen for Unit 5B again. The lease started immediately. I had 18 days before their kitchen demolition began. 18 days to dismantle my life, pack it into boxes, and disappear. I picked up my phone. Jennifer had sent a follow-up text. "Did you get this? We need to coordinate the drop-off." I typed a single thumbs-up emoji and hit send. It was the last lie I would ever tell them. The war was over. They just didn't know they had already lost. The decision to vanish wasn't born from a single argument. It was the result of a slow, suffocating accumulation of data. If the emergency key was the contract, the jewelry party was the fine print that revealed the true cost of doing business with my family. It happened 3 weeks after I gave her the key. I had come home early from a client briefing on a Thursday afternoon, my head pounding, desperate for the silence of my loft. But when I unlocked the door, I didn't hear silence. I heard the clinking of cheap Prosecco flutes and the high-pitched, performative laughter of suburban women. I stepped into my own foyer and stopped. My living room, my sanctuary of minimalist design and quiet productivity, had been transformed into a pop-up shop for mid-tier costume jewelry. There were 12 strangers in my apartment. They were sitting on my white linen sofa. They were resting their wine glasses on my drafting table right next to a prototype logo I was designing for a tech startup. And in the center of it all stood Jennifer, holding a tray of faux gold bangles, beaming like she was the queen of a castle she hadn't paid for. Oh, Kayla. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, like a director whose scene had been interrupted by a walk-on extra. You're home early. Ladies, this is my daughter, the one with the fabulous taste I was telling you about. I stood there, clutching my laptop bag, feeling the air conditioning hit the sweat on my back. Mom, what is happening? It's just a little mixer for the neighbors, sweetie, she said, breezing past me to adjust a display of necklaces she had draped over my television. Our living room is being painted, and honestly, the light in here is so much better for the gold tones. I knew you wouldn't mind. You're always working anyway. She said it with such casual entitlement that I felt the floor tilt. She hadn't asked. She hadn't texted. She had simply assessed my property, determined it was a superior asset for her needs, and commandeered it. Watching her laugh at a joke a neighbor made, watching her gesture around the room as if she had curated the art on the walls, the realization hit me. I finally understood the architecture of her mind. In psychology, they call it the narcissistic extension. To a mother like Jennifer, a child is not a separate human being with their own rights, privacy, and property. A child is simply an extra limb. You don't ask your left arm for permission to scratch an itch. You don't ask your leg if it wants to walk to the kitchen. You just use it. To her, my apartment wasn't a separate legal entity that I paid for with my own money. It was just the north wing of her existence. It was an annex she could occupy whenever her own reality became inconvenient. Mom, I said, my voice low, you need to get everyone out. Now. She froze, her smile dropping into a look of martyred shock. Kayla, don't be dramatic. We're almost done. Don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors. You have 5 minutes, I said. Or I start asking these women if they know they're trespassing. She hustled them out, rolling her eyes and sighing loudly about my moods, but the damage was done. After they left, the apartment smelled of cloying floral perfume and violation. There were wet rings on my drafting table. My space didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a stage set she had rented without my consent. That night, I didn't ask for the key back. I knew she would just make a copy. I knew that physical barriers meant nothing to see a woman who didn't believe I existed outside of her definition of me. I realized then that I couldn't just lock her out. I had to remove the door entirely. The escalation moved from territorial invasion to property destruction exactly 14 days later. If the jewelry party was a misdemeanor, what I walked into on a Tuesday evening was a felony. I found my sister Brittany in my kitchen. She is 24 years old and describes her occupation as building a personal brand, which essentially means she is unemployed with a ring light. When I walked in, that ring light was set up on my granite island. 3 suitcases of clothes were exploded across my living room. She was wearing my bathrobe, holding a bottle of styling oil, and filming a Get Ready With Me video for an audience of 800 bots. Brittany, I said, dropping my keys. What are you doing? She didn't look up from her phone. Mom gave me the key. The lighting in our house is trash, and I have a brand deal to shoot. Don't walk behind me, you'll ruin the aesthetic. I walked past her and looked down. My rug. It was a vintage runner I had sourced from an estate sale, valued at $800. A dark, greasy stain the size of a dinner plate had soaked into the wool. The bottle of styling oil she was holding was uncapped. You ruined the rug, I stated. She glanced down, bored. Oh, that? It spilled. Relax, Kayla. It's just a rug. You can probably edit it out in Photoshop or something. You're the graphic designer, aren't you? She wasn't apologizing. She was assigning me a task. In her mind, my possessions were props for her life, and my skills were the janitorial service for her mistakes. I didn't yell. I didn't throw her out. I simply calculated the replacement cost and added it to the mental ledger I kept titled Reasons to Leave. I retreated to my bedroom and called my father Brian. I needed to hear it. I needed to confirm that the rot went all the way to the foundation. She ruined an $800 rug, Dad, I said, keeping my voice flat. I want to be reimbursed. Kayla, stop, he sighed. It was his signature sound, the exhausted exhale of a man who confuses enabling with peacekeeping. Your sister is under a lot of pressure. She's trying to build something. Why do you always have to make it about money? Family helps family. Family respects property, I countered. You're being petty, he said, his voice hardening. We let you live in that fancy apartment and you can't even let your sister use the space for a few hours? Don't be selfish. We let you, as if they paid the rent, as if my lease was a privilege they had granted. I hung up. The transaction was complete. I had my answer. But the final breach happened 2 hours after I forced Brittany to leave. I was walking through the apartment, performing a damage assessment, when I felt a draft near the window that led to the fire escape. The latch was undone. The window was pushed up 3 inches. I froze. We were on the 2nd floor, facing an alley in Chicago. An unlatched window wasn't an accident. It was an invitation. I remembered my mother mentioning during the jewelry party that she had cracked a window for some fresh air because the Prosecco was making her warm. She had left it open for 2 weeks, or maybe Brittany had opened it today. It didn't matter who did it. What mattered was the negligence. I stared at the gap between the window and the sill. Anyone could have climbed up. I could have come home to a robbery. I could have woken up to a stranger standing over my bed. They didn't care if I was safe. They only cared if I was compliant. My safety was a secondary concern to their comfort. If I stayed here, it wasn't a matter of if something terrible happened, but when. I went to the calendar on my wall. I picked up a red marker and drew a thick X through the day. 14 days left. I wasn't just moving to a new apartment anymore. I was evacuating a collapse zone. For the next 18 days, I didn't live in my apartment. I occupied it like a sleeper agent waiting for extraction. The countdown on my calendar wasn't just a deadline. It was the only thing keeping me grounded as I executed the ghost protocol. The hardest part wasn't the logistics, it was the performance. Jennifer texted me every 48 hours with updates on her kitchen demolition. They found mold behind the cabinets. Stress. Dad is being grumpy. Can't wait to relax at your place. Do you have a coffee grinder or should I bring mine? In the past, I would have offered sympathy. I would have managed her emotions. This time, I simply sent back generic reactions, a thumbs up emoji, a wow, a sounds good. I gave her just enough engagement to keep her baseline steady, but not enough to trigger her radar. I was feeding the beast small scraps of attention so it wouldn't wake up and bite me before I was out of the cage. While she was planning her takeover, I was planning my exit. I hired a moving company called White Glove Relocation. They were expensive, $2,000 more than a standard rental truck, but they specialized in discretion. I told them I needed a silent pack-out. They didn't ask questions. They just sent 3 men in unmarked uniforms who packed my entire life into cardboard boxes with the efficiency of a bomb squad. I watched them take down the gallery wall in the hallway, photos of me and Brittany, family vacations, the visual evidence of my compliance. As they wrapped a photo of my college graduation in bubble wrap, I felt a phantom pang of guilt. It is a heavy thing to leave people who think they love you. But then I remembered the letter to the peace I deserve. It wasn't a physical letter I wrote, but a realization that formed in my mind as the shelves emptied. I used to believe that leaving required a conversation. I thought I owed them a manifesto of my grievances, a final chance to hear my side. But standing in the echo of my emptying living room, I realized the truth. Explaining is just an invitation for them to argue. If I told them why I was leaving, they would just tell me why I was wrong. They would twist my memories until I doubted my own sanity. I realized that I wasn't punishing them by leaving without a word. I was protecting the woman I was becoming. Silence is the only boundary a narcissist cannot cross. It is the only wall they cannot climb, the only lock they cannot pick. My silence wasn't an act of aggression, it was an act of preservation. By the 17th day, the loft was a white box. The rug Brittany ruined was in the dumpster. The furniture was in storage. The drafting table where Jennifer had rested her wine glass was gone. The space was sterile, stripped of my personality, ready to be returned to the market. I spent the final night sleeping on an air mattress, listening to the city hum outside the window. I checked my phone one last time, a text from Dad. "See you Monday morning. Mom is bringing the coffee." I turned off the phone and closed my eyes. They were coming for a host. They were going to find a ghost. The final morning in the loft felt like waking up in a hospital room after surgery. The space was sterile, echoing, and white. The walls were patched where my gallery had hung. The floors were swept clean of the dust Brittany's shoes had tracked in. I did a final walkthrough, checking closets and cabinets. Not out of nostalgia, but out of precision. I wasn't leaving a single bobby pin behind. I wasn't leaving a single strand of DNA for them to clone. At 8 a.m., I took the elevator down to the lobby to meet Mr. Russo, the building superintendent. He was a nice man, older, with a mustache that twitched when he was nervous. He looked surprised to see the 3 suitcases standing next to me. "Moving out already, Miss Kayla?" he asked, taking the brass key from my hand. "I thought you had another 6 months on the lease." "I'm breaking it," I said. "I paid the penalty fee online last night. It's done." He nodded, looking relieved that he wouldn't have to chase me for paperwork. "Well, you were a quiet tenant. We like quiet. Shame about the family drama, though. Your mother. She's a spirited woman." I paused. My hand was on the handle of my suitcase. "Mr. Russo," I said, keeping my voice casual, "I've been meaning to ask, why did you keep letting her in, even when I wasn't home?" "I never gave written permission for unaccompanied visits." He blinked, his eyebrows knitting together in genuine confusion. "Written permission? Miss Kayla, she's on the lease." The lobby went silent. The hum of the vending machine in the corner seemed to stop. "Excuse me?" "The co-occupancy rider," he said, shuffling behind his desk to pull a thick hanging file. "She filed it about 2 weeks after you moved in. Said you forgot to sign it during the initial intake." He pulled out a document and slid it across the marble counter. I looked down. It was a standard legal addendum titled Authorized Co-Tenants. Listed clearly in black ink were the names Jennifer Miller and Brian Miller, and at the bottom, right next to my mother's flamboyant, looping signature, was my name, Kyla Miller. But the K was looped. It had a flourish at the top that I never used. It was the way Jennifer wrote my name on birthday cards. It was the way she wrote my name on school permission slips when I was 7. She had forged my signature. The world didn't spin. It didn't blur. It sharpened. Suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't just about boundary stomping. This wasn't just about an overbearing mother wanting to check on her daughter. This was fraud. She had legally inserted herself into my home so that I could never kick her out. She had turned my sanctuary into a shared asset without my consent. "Is something wrong?" Mr. Russo asked, sensing the shift in the air. I stared at the forgery. I could have told him. I could have called the police right then and filed a report. But that would have required staying. That would have required interviews and statements and engaging with them. And right now, I didn't want justice. I wanted erasure. "No, Mr. Russo," I said, sliding the paper back to him. "Nothing is wrong. Just checking the records." I walked out of the building and into the waiting Uber. As the car pulled away, I felt the final tether snap. I had felt guilty for 18 days. I had wondered if I was being too harsh, too cold, too paranoid. But looking at that signature, the guilt evaporated. They weren't just toxic parents, they were criminals, and I wasn't a daughter running away from home. I was a victim escaping a crime scene. Monday arrived with the precision of a scheduled execution. At 8 a.m., 30 miles away in Naperville, a demolition crew was taking a sledgehammer to my parents' granite countertops. I knew the schedule because Jennifer had sent me a copy of the contractor's timeline weeks ago, highlighting the dates she would need access to the annex. By 9 a.m., their kitchen would be a debris field of drywall and dust. By 9:30, they would be pulling up to my building in Wicker Park, suitcases in the trunk, ready to check into the hotel of Kayla. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment on the 20th floor of the Sentinel. The wind was stronger up here, cleaner. I had a mug of black coffee in my hand and my phone sitting face up on the glass table. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. At 9:42, the screen lit up, Mom. I watched it ring. I didn't silence it. I just watched the name pulse on the screen like a warning light. It stopped. 2 seconds later, it started again. Then a text, key isn't working. Did you change the locks? Open up. Then Dad called. Then Brittany. By 10 o'clock, I had 32 missed calls. The phone was vibrating so constantly, it was essentially walking across the table. A younger version of me would have looked at that screen and seen panic. I would have imagined them worried about my safety, thinking I was hurt or dead. I would have felt the crushing weight of guilt that I was causing them distress. But I wasn't that person anymore. I looked at the phone and saw data. In behavioral psychology, there is a term for this: the extinction burst. It occurs when a conditioned subject, like a rat in a lab, or a controlling parent suddenly stops receiving the reward they have come to expect. When you stop feeding the behavior, they don't just give up. They escalate. They push the lever frantically. They scream louder. They explode. It isn't a sign of love or concern. It is the violent, desperate reaction of a parasite realizing the host has been detached. I finally picked up the phone to listen to the voicemail Jennifer had just left. Her voice wasn't the sweet, manipulative tone she used when she wanted a favor. It was high, ragged, and hysterical. Kayla, where are you? The apartment is empty. Mr. Russo said you moved out. What do you mean you moved out? The contractors already gutted our kitchen. We have nowhere to go. We have suitcases on the sidewalk. Call me back right now. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She was screaming because her housing plan had just evaporated, and she was realizing that the co-occupancy fraud she committed was worthless if there was no lease to occupy. She was homeless, not because of a disaster, but because of her own hubris. I took a sip of coffee. The city looked beautiful from this height. The cars down below were just toys. My old life, my old apartment, my old guilt, it all felt small. I opened my messages. I didn't type an explanation. I didn't tell them about the forgery I had found. I didn't give them my new address. I simply raised my phone and took a photo of the view from my balcony, a sea of skyscrapers, clouds, and absolute untouchable distance. I hit send. Then I blocked the numbers. Jennifer, Brian, Brittany. One by one, I severed the digital arteries. The phone went silent. The extinction burst was over. The subject had been neutralized. If you've ever had to become a ghost to save your own life, share this story. You're not crazy, you're just free.